Welcome to Exit Point, a podcast about the advancement of base jumping and the exploration of its culture. I'm Matt Blank, producer and co-host. If you'd like to support this independent production, please visit our Buy Me a Coffee link in the description and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. In this episode, we're talking to Avery Badenhop, Dennis McGlynn, and Harry Parker, known during the 90s as the three-headed dragon of bass, and founders of the infamous Team Ill Vision, which has been a timeless model for outlaw extreme sports gangs living an endless summer lifestyle. The leader of Team Ill Vision, Avery, is the quintessential counterculture athlete, creating a unique lifestyle that would inspire generations of jumpers to go all in and totally cut away from the mainstream. Dennis McGlynn is one of the first jumpers to perform bass stunts for film and television. He is also a pioneer of manufacturing bass-specific gear, was one of the original FJC instructors, and the first to be prosecuted by the federal government for bass jumping. And the man with the perspective, Harry Parker, has been an active jumper and photographer for more than 3 decades, participating in and capturing some of our community's historic moments. Harry helped put the face and voice to the base jumping lifestyle. Their team created a culture around the pursuit of base jumping, opening the first public events, competitions, and demonstrations. Their access efforts helped open jumps on BLM land, the Perrine Bridge, and recrafted Bridge Day in West Virginia, as well as forged paths to international base events, which have continued to grow over several decades. So without further ado, let's get these original gangsters on the track. Avery Badenhop, thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Matt. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to be on this podcast. I came along with a couple people. I got my buddy Dennis McGlynn here.
How you doing? Thanks.
And I also got Harry Parker.
Great to be here, Matt.
So we got a room full of legends, and what's going on around us right now? Where are we, and what's going down?
We're currently back in Moab for the Turkey Boogie 2023, and we got groups of people, and we got a whole gang here to celebrate Thanksgiving and jump off rocks.
Nice. Let's get into some history for the moment. There's a lot of people in town. There's like nearly, 350, 400 base jumpers here?
Easy. They're everywhere.
Okay, let me ask you this. When you started jumping in Moab, how many people around?
Well, it was mostly just like us 3 and maybe 3 other people.
And take us back to what year that was.
The first time I jumped in Moab was at Tombstone, and it was 1995.
95. So nearly 30 years ago.
Nearly 30 years ago.
I'd say that there's a large segment of our community that is younger than that.
Way younger. A lot of them.
And I understand that your daughter just started jumping. I saw her packing up a parachute just earlier.
Yeah, she did. The apple didn't fall far from the tree with my child, and she's taken up the sport. It's pretty awesome.
Well, let's take it back even further and back to where did you first jump? Take us through your progression and what year it was.
Okay, well, I started skydiving in 1981 when I was living in Hawaii, and then by the early 90s, I was living in California. I took up skydiving again in California. And it was during the early 90s when people started showing up with base jumping videos, showing us this new thing that people were doing. It was like, oh my goodness, base jumping? You guys are out of your mind.
I'm imagining base jumping videos back then, like reel-to-reel cameras on people's heads. What was the deal there?
Oh, that was back in the days of the brick. And actually, Dennis is the person who took me on my first base jump, and it's interesting to see how teaching base jumping has come a long way, because Dennis did a great job, but it was like so rudimentary and basic, right, Dennis?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it was a little different than it is today. There was no courses to go sign up for. Kind of the mentorship was all about.
Well, then here's what I want to hear. I want to hear that story of your first jump from both of your perspectives, because I got to say it's always different from the person doing it than the person teaching it.
Okay, so I was skydiving in Petaluma in 1993, and the DZO needed some help, and so he called some people from Lodi, and Bill sent Dennis, Steve Jester, Rick Payne, and Frank Everhart over to Petaluma to come out and be tandem masters and video guys. And so when they showed up, not Frank, he was just a skydiver, but Steve and Dennis and Rick, they were showing me and my buddy Seth these videos of base jumping, and it was old school stuff. It was just like so crazy. We're just like, no way, we're not doing that. 6 months later, there I am up at the Auburn Bridge with Dennis and Brenda, and it's like, and back then all it was like, this is how you pack, hold this little pilot chute in your hand and jump off and count to 3 and then throw it. That was like,
Count to 3?
That's how you learn to base jump.
Damn.
Huh, Dennis?
Yeah, it was December 12th, I think.
It was.
It was like we took a lot of people out to the Auburn Bridge. We had a nice place to go take people for their first jump. Told them to keep their head high. They'll be fine. Count to 3. They'd count to 1 usually. They just had to have a little bit of canopy control. It was a long landing area, not as long as it is today, but it was a long landing area. It was like landing on an aircraft carrier. It was a great landing area. You just needed to land on it.
Yeah.
And he did good with that, and he got the bug right away.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it scary at all watching somebody do a delay the first jump? Like, are you nervous at all that they might mess something up? Or back in the day, were you pretty confident that Avery was going to nail this?
We're pretty confident he was going to nail it. But, yeah, it's always scary watching anybody make their first base jump. You just never know what's going to happen, really.
Yeah. Avery, was it scary? Take us through your experience of this.
Every base jump is really scary, but that's what it's all about. That's what we do. And I was so ignorant of really what was going on. You know, it was just like, it was perfect because I was just having fun. I'm all, oh, this is obviously going to be fun. I learned how to pack this parachute. This guy told me exactly what to do. We're all good. Here we are. And then as soon as Dennis landed, I told him, hey, I need to order one of those rigs you build.
Yeah, what kind of rig were you jumping? What was the canopy? What was the container? What was this all about?
Rig that I was using was a Vision built by Gravity Sports, which is Dennis McGlynn. And back then, one of the hottest canopies of the day was a Raven 3. And so I was jumping a Raven 3.
Raven 3, talk us through that. What kind of technology was put into that?
Well, a Raven at that point was basically a reserve canopy. So it was a more docile 7-cell canopy. And so it was like just really desirable in the base community because, you know, the first canopies that the canopies that I had to use until I got my own built canopies, we were jumping Furies and Pegasus and Cruise Lights. And they were like so-called hot canopies at the time, you know? So getting into that, and fortunately, canopy development came along. But like, yeah, Raven was a hot canopy, huh, Dennis?
Oh, yeah, it still is. I still jump a Raven 4.
In the baseball world?
Oh, yeah, that's my number one canopy. I put it anywhere.
Pick those things up for $100 and $150.
Brand new.
And the reason that you could use them is because Raven was built for both main and reserve, and it had an attachment point to attach the bridle to. So was it shoe-in?
How about the line sets? Like, how did those things hold up? I see these videos from Bridge Day back when, and like people blowing out line sets left and right.
Well, that's how you needed a new one.
We figured out where they blew out. We learned, we blew them up. I blew several canopies up. Fix it. Go back at it.
1 year I think it was in 1995. No, it was in 1994. There was a crew team called the Shooting Stars, and they were out in Davis. And I found out from one of the girls on the team that the team was getting a whole new set of canopies, and they were going to sell their 5 old clapped out crew canopies, and they were Furies. And I said, I will take all 5 of them. And we went out to Lake Powell and blew up 3 of them.
Okay, I've got to get you guys to confirm or deny a rumor that I heard from Martin Tilley. Now he's refused to come on the podcast thus far. I'm trying to convince him. But one of the things that he told me during one of the interviews that I gave him over the phone was that back in the day, if you were going to learn, you had to bring $300 of burial money in case your parachute system failed. Your buddies weren't out the cash trying to bury you. Is he fucking with me, or is that something?
Well, I'd rather owe it than, I'd rather be in debt for it than to actually show up with the cash.
Okay.
I was a little more positive thinking, I think, than that.
Okay. So it wasn't quite that like these systems could fail at any time. You had
No,
some
not at all.
solid confidence in them.
I had a lot of confidence in them. They were working. They were our skydiving canopies at the time. That's what we jumped as hot skydiving canopy. They were good. They just weren't made for the slider down type opening shocks that we were getting. And we learned, like a lot of the canopies were the B line attachment points. That's where they were blowing up. We beefed them up. The reserves were already beefed up there. So we learned where they blew up. We fixed it up. We modified them in those places. I still jump those canopies today.
You got to remember too, back in the 90s and before, it was all skydiving gear. I was jumping a Warp 3 with a 26 flat Lopo reserve. Like, what you're witnessing is moving in, taking the skydiving stuff and configuring it to make it work for base, and eventually having base specific gear. So it was a transition.
I see. Okay, so Avery, take us through your progression. Did you jump these canopies in the sky world, or did you show up at the bridge and get handed something that was specifically supposed to be jumped there only?
Oh, well, so in the skydiving that I had done leading up to me getting into base jumping, it was all on just skydiving gear. And I don't know, in 1992, I was jumping a thing called a Rascal. And like the next year, I got a Sabre. So skydiving was one thing. Base jumping was really like this whole new thing. And so I had to like get involved in these different, this whole different canopy set that you use. These guys that started the base jumping thing with all the skydiving gear, they were really, renegades, and just like really going outside of a box, if you will, with what they were doing. And so in this interim period during the 80s leading up to the early 90s when I got into it, like Dennis was saying and Harry was saying, they started to learn about what was not working in skydiving gear for the base jumping environment, because base jumping really requires its own gear. I did, right after I made my first base jump, I immediately ordered my own base rig, and I got a hold of the people that make the Ravens, and I ordered a custom colored Raven, just what I wanted, because that's what we were doing. And then we had to start learning this new technology and getting the gear to be specific for what we were doing, not any longer modifying somebody else's shit for our shit.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. At the time, what was it like to get in to the sport, like into the community? What was it like to try and convince somebody to take you out on a first jump and then make equipment for you? What was the reputations of base jumpers, at the time?
It was so much different than it is today. The community of base jumpers was really small, and everybody pretty much knew everybody. And so, I was so fortunate that I just got introduced to Dennis McGlynn, because he was one of the guys that was innovating the gear, and he was looking for people who were willing to pay him to make them gear that they were going to jump. They were going to entrust their life to him. And so you get into these little, I got into a little niche and a little clan, because not any Tom, Dick, and Harry could just get on the internet that we didn't have and buy base gear. You had to know somebody. You had to show them that your interest and your dedication to doing it. And then the mentorship, it was, it didn't start off as instruction. It was just like immediate mentorship.
Back to what Marty was talking about, there is a little bit of truth to that. When I first came across base jumping, it was something there's no way I don't want to do that. That sounds absolutely ridiculous, but that is the seed that gets you like, wow, what is that? And then you do meet somebody. Back in the day, you couldn't bring a base rig or onto a drop zone. I mean, you were shunned and you would get in trouble for even showing it. So, I can remember when I was told, like, if you get hurt on this base trip, you're on your own. We're going to leave you. If anybody gets hurt, we're leaving, and we're going to we'll drop a quarter in the payphone, and that's it. I mean, that was kind of the mentality back then. It was pretty dark. And I think to Dennis's point, like, we were what he was bringing us for was a lot more positive, because it was innovation. And you got to understand, you're in a transition from one generation to the next generation, moving from, equipment to be base specific, which is, along with that is a lot of change, mentality, ethics, the way you view it. And, so yeah, it was a transitioning period. So Marty had a point there. It was pretty dark for a while.
Well, on that note of, the ethics and the mentorship, what was it that Avery did to convince you that he was part of the crew, that he was ready to do this thing? How did somebody get in with you?
You just kind of answered the question. He was one of those guys who was ready to get into the thing. He wanted it. You could see it in his eye that he wanted to do it. I was pretty open about, sharing the knowledge with people that wanted to do it. And, he had the enthusiasm. He was there 100%. We went on to do the Bridge Day stuff, and we had a little clan going for a while. It was a lot of fun.
Was there anyone at that time that walked up to you and you could tell that they just weren't with it? Or did mostly people come up to you who were already dedicated?
Yeah, if you sought me out, you wanted to do it. I could tell they wanted to do it. People didn't just come up and... Back then, it was either you do want to do it or you don't want to do it. The skydivers would say, all that energy, time, and effort for 2 seconds, I just don't get it. And you say, that's right, you don't get it. We don't need to deal with it. So you could tell. You could just look at somebody now and they wanted to do it. It was no... You either knew or you didn't. And if people came to you, it was because they wanted to do it.
I've heard back in the day that the seriousness of the consequences basically were written on the wall. And so if somebody was talking about it on the drop zone, then you already knew that they had accepted some of this ridiculously dangerous stuff. Versus today, there's a lot of talk about it being safe. A lot of talk about it being fun. Yeah,
it was definitely different, but it had come to a point to where you didn't have to risk your life in a certain way. It wasn't just a roll of the dice. There was some stuff that gave you good odds, good chances to do it. I was a firm believer in that. But when I first started, my first base rig was a Vector with a bag on it. It was a heavy parachute, with inside of a bag, and luckily I'd bought a big pilot chute. That's what saved my life. It's what got me through using a skydiving rig as a base rig. When base rigs came around and slider down base started happening, it was an absolute. To me, it was a given. The only malfunction you were going to have, besides a catastrophic, riser release or something like that, was a line over. It's basically all you were going to have. 180s, line twists, and line overs. If you could deal with all them, you had it made. And we felt we could do that.
So tell me, Avery, what made all this worth it for you? Obviously, there was a way to do this sustainably back in the day, but still a lot of risk involved. And I would argue much more than today. What was that motivation for you?
Well, it was just because of the initial experience of what it was like, to the peacefulness and just the whole, everything that went into my first base jump. Going into it, I wasn't super enthusiastic, but I knew I really wanted to do it, and I didn't really know which direction it was go. But as any base jumper knows, as soon as you have that experience, you understand what that experience is. And it's just ultra low free fall was just something, the visuals, the peacefulness, just being somewhere quiet and starting your base jump, and just everything else disappears. And it was just it was a perfect thing for me to go, oh, I need to do this again. And then once I did it again, it's I need to do this a whole bunch more. And then all of a sudden it's that's what I'm doing.
Okay. Yeah, I also have trouble sometimes expressing what it's like to base jump to people that haven't done it. Oftentimes I'm well, to really get the idea, you got to go do it. And I don't recommend that, but I'm going to fail at describing it without you actually experiencing it.
Absolutely. You understand. You can't really describe to somebody who hasn't made a base jump what it is that makes a base jump so fulfilling. And all the people who have made the base jump know, and then of course some of them have found out and don't do it anymore. And then for the rest of us, it's no, we're doing it.
Well, do you have any words for people who are base curious?
Don't do it.
It can become a therapy. It's but if they haven't done it, what's my advice for them? And I don't know. Learn about it. If you really want to do it, I can't say don't do it, because it's I do it. I love it. Still doing it. Been doing it a long time. It's a therapy. I mean, it's a good charge of positive life when you jump. I've taught a lot of people to jump, taken a lot of people over the years. And it's rewarding to see them find it and understand it and survive it. Like, look at Avery. He's still going. He's going strong.
Yeah.
Harry, he's still going strong. We're still hanging in there.
And let me ask you, just to get some background, your first jump was in what year?
1987.
And Harry?
Base jumping?
Yeah.
It was like 88, 89.
Okay. We're going to get to longevity at the end of this, but let's keep going through the history. And Avery, fill us in on what happened from your first jump, through the next couple decades. Give us some plot points of where the sport went, where you went in it.
Okay, so when I first started base jumping, really there was a lot of people who were still reinventing the wheel, so to speak, to get the gear to be specific for base. There was still the buzz about Mark Hewitt and how he had come up with the line mod. A lot of this stuff was still early. When I think the base fatality list was like at number 27 or something, and it's like when somebody got killed base jumping, it's like it affected the whole community. It still does, but in a different way. So, I didn't invent base jumping, but I jumped with the guys that did, because I was running around with Dennis McGlynn and Mo Valletto and Mark Hewitt and all these guys that were just like the innovators. So once I started base jumping, and I started base jumping with a partner, Seth Blake, because we had talked earlier about, the sustainability and how it goes through. So what was going on in those days was we went out and had somebody take us on our first base jump, and then that was it. Now we had to figure it out for ourselves. Fortunately, Seth had just done the same thing at the same time as I. Somebody had taken him to the bridge and he had made a base jump. And so Seth and I got together. It's like, we're going to be base jumpers. So now we had two guys who were going to be bros and go base jumping together locally and look out for each other. And that's what kind of started the just a bit of the camaraderie that I would then get into my fold in those early days. Then we started, then other skydivers from the drop zone also decided, hey, we're interested in this base jumping thing. Ed Trick, he's all, hey, I want to get into base jumping. Dave Clahan, hey, I want to get into base jumping. And then we find out our other buddy, Jeff Stout, he's already a base jumper, but we didn't even know it because he was so secretive about what he was doing. So
I'd like to talk through some of the relationship development of your jumping partners. What was it like to get to know each other, and what kind of conversations did you guys have as you were learning this thing basically on your own?
Well, fortunately, we already knew each other because we hung out at the drop zone. We were skydivers and we took up the base jumping. But, our lives then began to get more involved by really, meeting these people, and we're going to their houses and meeting their families and, like that. So it's kind of a brotherhood if you get into a really tight-knit group. And we found out, because our little group was in Sonoma County, and we found out, there's other little groups out in Sacramento, and there's these other guys that live down in San Jose. And so we started to integrate with all the locals and talk about the local objects. And we were, it's funny how, nowadays when you learn to base jump, you go to the Perrine and you make like 50 base jumps. My 14th jump was my building, and we were just down there in the city teaching ourselves how to do urban base jumping.
Let me ask you this. Was there anyone at the time that was just like doing this completely outside the community, or did most people or all people eventually rub shoulders with you guys to get into the practice?
No, there's certainly two different kinds of base jumpers really back then. Because like I say, we didn't even know Jeff was a base jumper, and there were a lot of base jumpers who went base jumping and they didn't talk about it. You didn't know them. And then there was a bunch of the others, that always did get together. Like basically anybody who went to Bridge Day back at the time, because that was the only thing going on for base jumpers was Bridge Day. So, the guys that would show up at Bridge Day, we knew who they all were and everybody knew who they were, but there were still other guys that were like, I'm not going to Bridge Day. I don't want anybody to know who I am.
Yeah. So how did the community and the practice transition from almost all underground to sponsored events.
Okay, so this is really what really happened as far as the timeline. When I met Dennis in 1993, he was already going to Bridge Day, and he had already been doing that for several years. And just by his nature, he had integrated himself into somewhat of the structure of how things were going at Bridge Day. I went to my first Bridge Day with Dennis in 1994. And then that was the first time I had seen an event of base jumping. And it just like, I'm all, oh my goodness, this is going on. And so I hung out with Dennis, and Harry was there with us. And he was helping Andy Kalstrat do a bunch of stuff, because Andy Kalstrat was a bit of a douchebag in just the whole thing that he was doing. Oh my goodness. Andy Kalstrat made base jumps. He was not a fucking base jumper. He was not.
Okay, I want to hear about that. What is the difference between somebody that base jumps and a base jumper?
Well, the guys that show up every year at Bridge Day with their skydiving rig, they make a base jump. Then there's guys like me who I need 6 different rigs, so I am prepared for whatever comes tomorrow. And I'm base jumping all the time. 30 years later, I'm still base jumping my ass off.
So some people do the thing, some people live the thing.
Exactly.
I would almost say that it's a balance between like your ego and humility, the ability to be in community doing something, having enough ego and the drive to do it to even begin with, but enough humility to be in community to do it together. And, you know, that was our greatest strengths, is using the groups of people for all the learning and all the advancement and all the innovation. We didn't have to do it by ourselves.
Can I pick at that for a second? Because that's an interesting concept you bring up. Oftentimes in our culture today, ego is brought up completely in a negative connotation, or with a negative connotation. But from my perspective, you have to have at least some sense of yourself to understand whether you can or cannot do what you're about to try. And so like a certain amount of ego is necessary. I like, what's your opinion here? Where's the balance? How do you tip from one side to the other? Too little, too much, right enough?
I think, who would we be as humans without ego? We would all be the same. Ego is kind of really what separates us and make us different, and it's part of the process of your own spiritual evolution on this planet. The ability to cage it, tame it, or learn to live with it is, you know, your spiritual development. And I think in base, where we face, you know, life and death together in this way that is really kind of strange from normal life, you know, that is kind of the development of it all. And I witness it in the people that you actually interview. Like they're in retrospect over time, they're like, they look back, they've softened, they've been able to find a balance. And I think, like, when you asked before, who gets into base jumping and how did you get into the crew? Dude, you had to be able, like, you had to have the ego to drive to get in there, to separate yourself and make it work. But you also had to have some humility to be with other people. If not, like, if you couldn't be together and you were just an asshole, like, who would hang out with you anyway? So
came down to it, there was no lying at the exit point. You know what I
I
mean?
like that. I like that.
Find out who people are. When it's time to jump, you can find out who they are. They can talk it up all they want, but when it's time to jump, the truth comes out who they are.
Yeah, I like that. That works.
And on that subject of ego, because I remember in a previous podcast I had heard a little conversation about that. The thing is that artists have an ego. And that's why artists are the way they are. And I consider myself an artist. I have a self-expression that I want to express myself, and that is through base jumping. And it then becomes double-fold, because it can also be an art that others can enjoy or not. It's up to them. I'm creating art.
Okay, on that note, what pushes the practice into performance art? Is it on the whole always performance art, or do you need to do something? Do you need to do it in a certain way for it to be part of that category?
Well, you know, it kind of ties into where we were getting into this history thing. So in my introduction to Bridge Day and to Dennis and Harry and to what Dennis's Dennis was trying to accomplish at Bridge Day. And then the three of us kind of collaborated in 1985 over that whole year. And we started to talk about how can we get out of the bushes, hiding in the middle of the night, jumping nothing but black, and how can we make this come into the daylight? And so we started thinking of ways to make what we had a little competition at Bridge Day, and we started thinking, what if we could do something further with this? And then and so it took us a little while, and we did a lot of research, and we did a lot of traveling, going around and looking at stuff. In 1986 was the first year that we ran Bridge Day, because in 1985, the conversation came up, and Andy Calstrat knew it was coming, and he saw what we were trying to do, and he knew Dennis was already helping us, and he said, I got to get out of town. Can you guys help me out? And so that's when we transitioned, and we took over the organizing of Bridge Day, and we had a big competition there, and we said, well, look, we can get this into the light if we could just find somewhere else to get all these people to go other than this. And we went to places like Twin Falls, Idaho. We had come to Moab in 1995 because we were in the middle of a court case from a little accident we had out at Lake Powell in 94. We should talk about that a little bit too, Cliff Camp. So anyway, like I say, we ended up going, well, when we went down to Moab, they didn't really want us to bring a bunch of people, so we've learned how to get permits to do things. When we first went to the bridge in Twin Falls, Idaho, we weren't allowed to jump. And so once again, we figured out a loophole, and we got permits to do stuff. So all of a sudden, we brought all the base jumpers together in these arenas, whereas in the middle of the day, you can do whatever you want. It's fully legal. And then that started to change how the base jumpers wanted to look, right?
Yeah, then it became more performative.
More performative.
I'd like to
Absolutely.
speak to that as well. You know, I think through the perspective and the lens of just simple evolution, you know, when we were running from the cops and hiding in the bushes, as Avery said, you know, we really started to toy with the idea, what if we could get them to pay us to do this, right? And by creating the competitions, by creating group atmospheres, I mean, we were known for having the biggest loads at Auburn from the beginning. Like, it was a circus from the beginning. And I think that when you take the individual, put them in a group, right? Now you can see what each other's doing. You have a reflection of who you are and who you're being. And then that becomes a support structure, right? And we see it today. I am blown away at what's happening in Moab and in performance art. Like back in the day when we were creating the events and really kind of spitballing it, KL to me was always this Las Vegas style event where, you know, you had headliners and you had, you know, the girls doing the silks and you had these things, you know, where it was, so that's kind of how I see it. I see it as an evolution of being in community to begin with, is a support structure for what you talk about actually being performance art.
Dennis, how do you feel about the evolution? And tell us a little bit, if you can, about the formation of Bridge Day and, now that Avery's mentioned it, Cliff Camp.
That's a lot of stuff right there.
That's a big.
Well, let's
one.
start with the evolution, right? We started at teaching Avery, and you getting into the game in the 1980s, which, wow. You know, I oftentimes I look at myself and I'm like, man, you're old, you know, especially for base jumping terms. Like, I feel like, you know, ancient. Just, you know, the room shrinks so much, you know, like of the people that have been jumping more than 10 years, it's not many, you know, more than 20 years. And that room gets down to like, you know, a dinner table, more than 30 years. And you're talking about like a car full of people that are still going at it. And so what was the evolution like for you?
Evolution to me, I came along in a way, became part of a wave that adopted and accepted slider down base jumping as the norm, as the safe avenue. So when I started jumping, it was still, Jean Banish was still running Bridge Day, and she suggested and promoted jumping your skydiving rig because there was altitude to cut away. So that you should be jumping your skydiving rig. Well, we learned about slider down base and started understanding the mechanics of it. So that's what we did, and it just became a whole different thing. A whole different perspective on how to jump, and we started jumping that way and promoting it to other people. And I think I was like the second person to make it to 100 base jumps without breaking any bones. So it was that's the evolution now, and it took off. And also, we were the first wave to be not totally ostracized at the drop zone for being a base jumper, having base jumping gear. Because when I started, you couldn't even be known that you were a base jumper. Because we became AFF instructors and tandem instructors, and we were still skydiving a lot. We were on the drop zone every weekend. I'm still on the drop zone every weekend. So they had to kind of take it in a different way. We weren't just the outlaw renegade that was getting the DZO in trouble when something would happen on an antenna tower or something. We were. I had my share of that for a while, but it kind of changed the evolution of successful base jumping. When I started jumping, also there had been 6 fatalities, and now there's 400 and some odd.
Yeah, to give you another statistic that I looked up recently, in the years 2014, 15, 16, 18, and 19, all of those years, there were more deaths per year than the entire 1980s.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot more people doing it.
Definitely.
The wingsuiters are definitely the ones that own the majority of those numbers.
Yep.
And there just weren't many base jumpers back then. And for the guys that continued to do it, understood slider down base. That's what really opened it up, I believe. And then we found some cliffs that were legal. There were no legal base jumps back then. You had bridge day, and something else once in a while would come along. But then once we found this little canyon, that we called it Freedom Canyon, that had some low cliffs at 400 feet, but that was slider down stuff, and they were legal. I remember being out there. We didn't care. We didn't have cell phones, and there was no rescue. If you broke your leg, compounded fracture or something, you were just going to die. We knew that.
It was 4 hours into the backcountry and like a 3 or 4 hour drive to the trailhead.
But they were legal. We could jump them we had landowners' permission.
Well, now we are kind of getting back into bring $300 worth of burial money with you.
It was,
we knew and accepted those risks.
It was part of it. It was a transition out of that darkness, really.
Didn't know cell phones existed because they didn't.
Was there a certain amount of peace that came with accepting one's demise?
I didn't accept my demise. I didn't think I was going to die. I was young and immortal, like a lot of us are when we're young. Just people thought I was really crazy. People thought I was a lot more crazy than I was. I wasn't crazy. I was more methodical about my safety than a lot of people gave me credit for.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. How did you make it to 100 jumps without a broken bone where most everybody else failed at that? Did you have secrets to the success?
Focus.
Evolution. You asked me about evolution in sport. Evolution. Mark Hewitt had come up with the line mod. That was
changed everything.
Changed everything. That was like putting a reserve on a base rig. You could jump one parachute now. With the line mod, that was your reserve. Nothing else was going to happen unless you catastrophically didn't hook your stuff up right. And you could have step throughs. You could have all kinds of stuff wrong because I did it all. You just have a knot at your risers. It's still open. You could still pilot the canopy down. And you could blow a canopy up. You could still jump it. It just wasn't going to act right. And you blow it up again a little bit more, and you start realizing this thing's got a big hole in it. Stop jumping it.
Which is true. It happened a lot. If
it could happen, it pretty much happened to me in a way. But I learned from each one of those, and it got more perspective on how short your steering lines are. Where your steering lines, where your brake settings. All that has a lot to do with it. And so I felt that I had the knowledge, had the ammunition to go out and be safe.
Yeah.
You need context too. Like Dennis was incredibly charismatic. He's incredibly generous. It's funny when, Avery brings up to, you pay Dennis for a rig. And I'm like, when did people pay Dennis for a rig? And so at the time he was living in Truckee, in Tahoe, and and he had a shop. So we were constantly, and this is, an interesting concept. Like we would go to Auburn and our jumps, we weren't just hooting it up. We're out there. Okay, we're going to test. When we got a wing, when you got a new canopy, the first thing you did is you put it in your Velcro rig, right? You took out the lines, you made it a slider down canopy, and then you went to Auburn, you put it on a skydive, and you took it on a skydive, and you would find your brake setting point for your weight and use a little marker and mark it, and then put your new brake settings in, and then you go to Auburn and test it. And we would go to Auburn and test all the time, brake settings, does this thing work in rear risers? Can I back up? Can I do turns? Like if we would do floaters off it and try to go 180 degrees, and how far the guy on top would judge if you were able to back that thing up before you hit the object. I mean, this was the time of really trying to figure out, because none of us wanted to die.
Experiment science.
None of us wanted to die, and we to like Dennis and Avery's point, like it was all about living, in that moment. And I think what I get at a lot of the people you're interviewing now is that, we look back, and it's not like the jumping is what was the cohesiveness of living in such a risky environment, but it's the bonds and the camaraderie that who you're with and doing it together is really the gold, and surviving it is the gold of it in the end.
Well, let's talk about doing it together, and maybe Avery can pick up the pieces for us on Cliff Camp. So we started with the evolution.
That's
and
a big
we went
one.
through the bridge day bits. Tell us about
It'll
Cliff
be
Camp.
okay, Dennis. It'll be okay.
Okay, so after I had been base jumping for that first 9 months, Seth, Ed, and I we were discovering San Francisco and the Bay Area. And then Dennis said, I'm organizing this thing out in Lake Powell. It's called Cliff Camp. And it's like, we're going to get all our stuff and all our boats and a whole stack of gear. And we're going to go out on Lake Powell. And there's all these different cliffs. And you guys are new to base jumping. You don't have a whole bunch of base jumps. So it's just an introduction for you to go learn how to jump off cliffs. And so we were all about it. We went out there, and Harry was with us, Dennis. Sorry. Harry, Dennis, Jack Reeves. Remember Jack Reeves? He was out there with us. There was some other newer base jumpers that were just starting to base jump. Tim Kronk, just some new students that Dennis was taking out there to teach them how to jump off cliffs. And so
Jack Gladys's son.
Yeah, Jeff Gladys was there.
Jeff Gladys as a kid, how old was he? 15, 16?
Yeah, he was young, just a baby.
Super young.
Remember that guy Hunter was there? And
Tim Kronk.
And it's interesting because some of those people, like after Cliff Camp 94, they didn't base jump anymore.
That was enough.
That was enough, yeah.
It was a baptism that was an experiment.
Well, tell us about the experiment. What was the deal?
The eventual deal was that I witnessed my first base fatality at Cliff Camp that year. And it was like, it started kind of it was a traumatic experience for all of us. It really scattered us, but it also made the three of us and a couple other guys a little bit more of a cohesive group, because now we were this gang of busted outlaws, and we had to go to court and answer for it. And it's like, but also it totally motivated us to say, why the fuck aren't we allowed to go out to these recreational places where you can do whatever the fuck you want except for jump off rocks? And that's all we were doing. So and actually when we came back down here for our court cases, that's when we first came down here to Moab to look at we've heard about this place, Moab. Let's go down and look at it. So, yeah, Cliff Camp was like kind of a fiasco, but it was a learning experience. And it turned out we weren't the first group to end up in legal trouble down at Lake Powell, because, Will Ox's group, like the year before, had run into the same thing. They're just down in Lake Powell enjoying their sport, and all of a sudden we got law officers telling us, you can't do that here. Here's your ticket.
Yeah, I think he got broken up at Lake Powell on a slider up jump and broke himself. Isn't that how they got caught?
Dennis?
Do you remember that? Like it was one of the first real big issues, base jumping, and it was at Lake Powell.
Yeah, there were three groups that got busted right around that time. And it was Will Ox's group and Kirk's group, I believe he was from Chicago. There were three groups. There were 42 people involved altogether for the three groups. And then we were fighting. We were in three different courts, two different districts. And they had Joe Sumner, the special criminal investigator, who was actually out there spending taxpayers' money.
Who we ended up having to face.
What were they trying to get you on?
Aerial delivery.
Illegal aerial delivery. Aerial delivery without a permit.
Was that the first time that law had been tried to?
Oh no, that's what's been keeping you out of Yosemite this whole time.
Right, but was that the first case?
The case was, I think, when Dennis had to go to court. We all had to go to court. I mean, we were putting aerial delivery on trial.
Yeah,
we wanted to set precedents because it made sense for Yosemite because the aerial delivery law was for not being able to be resupplied as a squatter in the back country, not as jumping into a park. But they could get away with that in Yosemite. But Lake Powell was a designated landing strip pursuant to special regulations that stated that the whole entire surface of Lake Powell was a designated landing area. You could parachute in there from an airplane. You could do anything you want. So it came down to the act of actually opening a parachute between the time you jumped off a rock and landed in the water. They defined as aerial delivery. And you could jump hang gliders. You could jump umbrellas, bed sheets, nothing. Do whatever you wanted. But if you had a parachute that opened up between the rock and the water, it was aerial delivery. So we had a case. We had a real case. We knew we had a case. So we fought it. We fought it. We spent over $50,000 to Fred Morelli just in travel expenses over those years. And he did everything for free as our crusader. And when it came right down to it, he said, "You're not going to beat the federal government. They're not going to let you. The most you can hope to do is introduce yourselves and make a mark in history for the next generation." But we were passionate. We wanted to prove our point. And we did. We proved our point. But they just said no, and that was it.
They just said no, and I'll tell you, what an experiment and an experience for all three of us to be dragged through the federal court system and risk freedom for what we believed in was our basic, rights of access. We were like, Dennis always says, we're going to take over the world. There was a lot of altruistic motivation behind a lot of what we did based on real experience, because Cliff Camp in itself, as young as we were in the sport and where we were to experience together, looking over the cliff at about 400 feet with a big talus and having one of your own members spiral in and hit the talus so hard he made a pop, and we're out in the backcountry for 6 hours and then had to deal with each other on a whole entire different level. It was a baptism.
So I got to ask, what actually happened on that incident, and if you will, what lessons were learned from it?
Oof.
Our good friend Paul Thompson had jumped off, and his rig was looked over and overseen by somebody else, and basically his steering lines were too long. So he jumped off, had a perfect on-heading opening, reached up, undid his brakes. His canopy, the tail shot up because it didn't pressurize properly. It started slowly turning to the left, and he was trying to get it pressurized, but it just took a little longer to pressurize. His steering lines were too long. You can understand that, right? See how that's happening? So by the time he got it pressurized and got some control with his toggles, he was turning to the left a lot. So he decided to just go with a turn.
Oof.
Hooked down, and he pulled the left toggle down as hard as he could, and he did a spiral. He couldn't have hit that cliff again in a million years if he tried. From what he did, everything just lined up for him to hit that cliff the way he did, and he hit it as hard as he could have, and bounced, I think, 3 times before he hit the water. And everybody said, "Why did he do that?"
Yeah, everyone was in shock. Like,
why did he do that?
Oof.
So that that was like a nuclear bomb going off. We didn't expect that to happen, and he had just given his helmet to Jeff, the kid that was on the load, who was walking towards the cliff. Him and Jeff were jumping a cliff off to the left. We were all on another cliff because we already jumped that one in the morning. And Jeff dropped his helmet and kicked it, and it was about to go over the edge. So he ran to get it, and Paul grabbed him and stopped him from going over the edge of the cliff. And Paul gave him his helmet. Don't know if that would have made a difference, but he definitely head injuries definitely was part that killed him.
So if I understand correctly, he went with the turn to try and increase airspeed to try and get some pressurization in the canopy.
Canopy just started pressurizing. The tail was just all wishy-washy, and it was trying to pressurize. If he'd have just done nothing, if he would have not touched anything, he would have flown straight out into the water. But he undid his brakes. Canopy started slowly turning left as it was pressurizing, and by the time it pressurized, this all happened in a few seconds,
Yeah.
But it pressurized, and as it was pressurizing, he went ahead and decided to go. He was a very experienced pilot, a canopy pilot and everything. He made a decision, right then, and pulled down on his left toggle to go with a turn, because then it was just pressurizing, so he had some speed. And the way he turned, the way he hit the talus, he couldn't have done it again. And I mean, it was just so rare that what had happened the way it did. And like I said, the nuclear bomb went off, and it was we weren't prepared for that. Really, it was we were forced to deal with some reality.
Well, what was that like? And also, I want to reiterate the question: what were the lessons learned?
What were the lessons learned? Well, gear. We dissected what happened. So. Gear awareness, have your gear adjusted for you. Everybody's a little different weight and stuff, different size canopies. And back then we were still jumping retired skydiving canopies for the most part. So, get it, do your test jumps on it, get it ready, don't end up with a canopy that's not dialed in for you. But it was a mistake that anybody could have made given that set of circumstances that he had. He didn't have many base jumps, he had a handful of base jumps. And he was part of our crew as far as working the event. So he was quick to give advice more than take it. And he was the one guy on the group that I hadn't personally overseen his equipment. Somebody else did. And his steering lines were just too long, and it wasn't dialed in. We were accused for many, many, many years after that, until we got our gear back after the court case was settled, that his toggles had come off. That was what everybody thought, the people that wanted to have an answer, have excuses. I said, his toggles didn't come off. His steering lines were too long. So we got to prove that right after the case was heard and sentence was passed and all this and that, we got to get the gear back. The judge gave us the gear back, and we got to inspect it finally then. And then it was an absolute what had happened. Because the video back then ain't the quality it is today. The media sure did want a copy of that footage too.
I'm glad they didn't.
No, we knew better.
To go back on your point, though, what was learned is, one was it really brought in the safety and the gear and everything to not let that happen again. But we had never really planned for any of that to happen. And now we had to face it. So, then it was about safety, rescue, and all the things that you don't think about until you have the emergency happen. I know that happens out here, right? Nobody thinks about all of a sudden you're on a 7-hour rescue and, so yeah, there was a lot learned and a lot implemented. It led into a lot of different things.
Avery, I want to touch back on what it was like to experience this. A lot of people, don't see somebody go in for years, sometimes never. And you were very early on in your career, you see not only somebody, but somebody that you knew and knew well. What was it like dealing with that?
Well, when I got into it, we already knew there was a list, and we already knew the risk, and we didn't expect to see it right there. But for me and my little crew, it was definitely an eye opener. Oh, people really do die, and sometimes right in your face. I had been bitten by the bug, and so it was too late to talk me out of it based on that. And, as surprising as it was for something like that to come up, it didn't really stop my motivation to continue doing what I was going to do.
More just get better at it?
Well, like Dennis has brought up, learn about the mistakes that were made and why did that happen and why is it so important. And it set a new habit for me. Like Dennis said, you get a new canopy, test it out. Go, put it in a skydive, figure out where your shit belongs.
Well, let me ask you this then. What do y'all think of the new standard, which is first base jump, never flown the canopy ever, no adjustments made at all? And once you come out here, some people, only a theoretical understanding of their emergency procedures. Somebody's told them what to do, but they've never tried it.
It's pretty incredible is what it is.
It's surprising in some ways that, the thing is that the gear has come a long way, and so at least the gear is much more reliable. Now, pilot training is something altogether different. And I just, not to interrupt, but I just want to say, so Dennis, how much time do you do for that leg Powell thing?
3 months, 90 days, 5 years supervised probation.
For what was the
going
infraction?
through the court case?
Yeah, what did they end up?
Aiding and abetting in an aerial delivery resulting in a death.
Yeah, they dropped the resulting in a death part because they were going to try to put me in jail for 5 years and.
Yeah, so you need to wrap your head around basically went up against the federal government to change the aerial delivery clause so we could get Yosemite legal. I mean, you got to understand the roots of this.
So let me get this right, though. Somebody makes a bad decision on a fully open canopy that is 100%, under their control, and the government wanted to give you 5 years for that?
Absolutely.
And
just for witnessing it.
Up to a $750,000 fine as well, because they call me aiding and abetting because it wasn't, illegal aerial delivery. So if they were going to charge me and fine me for that upper end sentence and punishment, I was allowed a jury trial. They had a jury selected, and it was I went to trial. The judge just decided, well, he was going to hear it as a bench trial. So if it was just a bench trial and it wasn't the extenuating circumstances that it resulted in a death, then he could just hear the bench trial. So he dropped all that, the enhancement stuff, and decided to have a bench trial. So when he did that, he excused the jury, and then the upper punishment was only up to 6 months in jail and up to $1,000 fine. So it changed that. So we went had our bench trial, and they didn't want to let us set precedents. The base jumpers weren't going to let us set precedent. The government wasn't going to let the base jumpers set precedents in that law because we were right. And the only way we were going to get, only chance we had to be heard again was we had to get back to the appellate court because they had already made a ruling. So you don't get back to the appellate court with an acquittal. You don't get back to the appellate court with a plea agreement. You only get back to the appellate court with a conviction. And the conviction, so I said, yeah, I did it, but what I did is not illegal. That's how I had to lose the case. Now, I was acquitted of the commercial operation without a permit. That was a good one because they really wanted to hang me on that one. But that's good. So we aiding and abetting. Somebody jumping off the cliff in the desert. They put me in prison for it.
Yeah, man, I just can't imagine this. Like the worst time in your life. You just seen a buddy go in. You're trying to pick up the pieces emotionally and physically.
Oh, this was years and years later. I mean, this thing went on that was 94. I didn't go to jail till 99 on that.
Oh yeah, but back to what Avery's point, when you asked Avery, that cliff camp was a catalyzing moment for all three of us. And Avery is one of those guys who's just so strong-headed. He knows what he wants to do. He's going to go out and do it no matter what, right? And it really kind of forged him, and I think all of us at a very young time in our own evolution of the sport, to where we began to hold each other tighter, right? We began to really form bonds that were deep and long-lasting, and it affected how we jumped and what we were going to do with the lives and the passion that we had in those times.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. How did your small crew become a team?
That happened with the evolution of the Dennis and Harry and I forming a management team, if you will, and then we took over Bridge Day, and then we decided, well, if we're going to do Bridge Day, we're going to do these other events, and we're going to start having a base jumping competition. And at competitions, they have teams, and we knew, we had a little crew in Sonoma County. We knew of little crews down in SoCal. We had just met some guys from the East Coast, and they had their little crew. And then all of a sudden, it turns out we met, Lee Whirling and Eric Santee, and they got their little crew out in Ohio. And we, basically went out to our community and say, hey, we're going to go out to Moab next year, and we're going to have a competition, and we're going to have a canopy competition and a precision landing competition, and we want people to have teams. Are you guys interested? Because we had already decided, and me and Ed and Seth and Big Dave, we already said, we're going to make a team. We're going to go to Bridge Day next year to the competition, and we're going to get in that competition, because the competitions I had seen in the years before were all individuals just dressed in jeans and T-shirts. And I said, you know what? We need to make a team, and we're going to have uniforms and suits and matching helmets and all this stuff. We're going to have a fucking team. And because I was just oriented that way and driven and just wanted to do it, this new concept of, hey, let's get base jumping out of the bushes and on fucking MTV,
Yeah. So tell us about the team name and tell us about where the team went once it was formed.
Oh, the team name is a funny little story. Because that happened in 1994, No, it happened after Bridge in 1994. So early 1995, Seth and Ed and Dave and I had gone into San Francisco, and we had snuck up the fire escape of the Hilton, and we base jumped, and we landed in the streets down the thing. And at the time, my family wasn't too thrilled about this new sport I had taken up because I had a 4-year-old daughter. So anyway, but we had decided we were going to be a team. We didn't know what we were going to call ourselves. And the first thing we had was a logo. Seth had showed up with this patch of this skull. He's like, I don't know where this skull came from, but this is a great logo. Anyway, back to the thing about the Hilton. I went over to my parents' house, and I told my parents, hey, man, last night, me and my boys, we went and jumped off of a building in San Francisco. And my mom said, you guys are sick. There is something wrong with you. And I said, yeah, but I got it on video. You want to watch? And of course they said, well, sure, we want to see it. And so that was the birth of Ill Vision.
Okay, sick. So mom calling you ruffians, and you've got the vision for it. What was the future vision of the team? Once you formed it, where did you want to go with it? Did you make it to MTV?
Well, actually, in some of the projects that we worked on, we did get on MTV. We did get on some of the other programs. What happened was then in 1997 was the first organized team-oriented base jumping competition right here in Moab. We went out to Tombstone and did a thing called the Tombstone Challenge. And we had Team Ill Vision. We had Dennis's team, Team Extreme. We had these guys that came from the East Coast, Team Impact. We had the guys from Ohio, Tongue and Groove. That was Lee Whirling and Eric Santee and those guys. Then the guys from the farther East Coast, Tim Kronk, Mike Carpenter, had the Spiders from Mars. All of a sudden, we had like several different groups of people that were willing to form a team and come out and do this experimental performance from the Tombstone Challenge, where we're going have this professional competition.
Well, let me ask you this. I heard you name a bunch of teams, and I got to be honest with you, I've never heard of a single one of them other than Ill Vision, which
they're all dead.
Well, okay. Oh man, Harry. Are they? Is that for real? Are they all?
No.
But
like the picture that you saw that I posted the other night. I mean, there's a lot of people in there that are gone, and we see it all the time. So.
Oh man. Okay. But back to the question at hand. I heard about Ill Vision before I was a base jumper. When I was still in skydiving. Hell, when I was a rock climber. It's in the ether. It's in popular culture. So I guess my question is, what made that team great? How did it survive?
Avery, when I'd like to take that a step back a little bit. A lot of this formulating of the whole team concept was how to, it's all part of the whole competition thing is all about the legitimizing the sport. Because it was like, well, how are you going to make it a sport? What do sports do? They compete. Well, how are we going to compete? Because I used to talk about it. People would go, what? You're going to compete in base jumping? That's stupid. And I'm like, yeah, it is kind of like, how are we going to do that? And so the evolution of bringing into the competition was natural. It's like, when you think about it, like, wow, what if we had teams? And the validation was immediate. It swept the entire country. People signed up in droves. A lot of people hated us for a long time because we had to say no. And it was one of the things that brought us together. Dennis was the visionary and the charisma, and Avery came on as Mr. No. He could say, no, you can't go. And we needed it because you couldn't, like, if you only said 30 people and you had 200 people want to go, it was really, really difficult back then. But the team environment exploded, and Avery, in his, Avery ways, just led the charge with Team Vision, as Dennis and I had our Team Extreme at the time. And no was not acceptable. He's going to do what he's going to do. And he was the guy that made the matching jumpsuits, made it like he set a lot of the standards that other people then were like, oh my God, we got to have matching jumpsuits. Like, it was pretty amazing to watch that wave. But it all was a real evolution that started way back at Bridge Day and finally made it to where we came to Moab, because as our experience happened in Cliff Camp, our natural avenue we started to think of aren't buildings, it's rocks. We're rock hoppers. is really who we are as base jumpers.
Well, I want to know about Avery saying yes and saying no. Was it certain qualities that you were looking for? And was it as important to say no to people as it was to say yes?
That's a good question.
That is, well, fortunately because our local base community was so small, at the time, there was a time when literally every base jumper knew all the base jumpers. And then as it got more popular, a lot of them, like say there was some guys that you just didn't see around anymore. They didn't want you to know. But I think people were getting more into the thing of they want to be seen. And so our group, it was easy for us to form a team. And then once we had a team of guys, and then we always jumped together and we knew who we could count on. And, just like any community, every once in a while, you come across base jumpers who are just douchebags and you don't want to jump with them and you don't want them around. And you just have to be able to say no. When it came to organizing of events, we wanted to have qualified people to form the team. It's one thing to say we're a team, but if you're a team of knuckleheads, you don't necessarily need to come on our loads. But there were some people who just say yes to anybody. Oh, you want to go? Yeah, let's go. And so it got to the point where we had to go, well, you know what? Actually, we want a higher caliber, more experience. Somebody, shows that they have a safety record, shows that they're not going to make an idiot of themselves. And sometimes they do anyway, sometimes they don't. But you just have to learn who you want to be with and who you don't want to be around.
At the height of the team, how many people were on it?
Well, when we were just base jumpers in the 90s, it was a 4-man team. And so often most of the teams would have like 5 people because it's pretty likely between now and the next time we get together, somebody's getting hurt, maybe even dying.
Or can't go, need rotation.
So then the people that were on the team kind of changed over the years depending upon lack of interest. Jeff Stout, he was an underground jumper. And after jumping with us for a couple of years, you know what? I really don't like the big crowd scene. I'm going to go back underground. Same with Big Dave Clahan. And then, we had people like Johnny Utah on our team. And then, for one reason or another, if the team said, oh, we couldn't go, then we'd have to find new alternates and find people, oh, well, when Team Ill Vision gets to this location, will you jump for the team? There were times when the base jumping team itself had maybe 8, 9, 10 people. And then later, when we transitioned to, we took our team back to skydiving once the wingsuits were involved.
Yeah, talk to me about that. Because when I got into the game, I was looking at sponsored Ill Vision wingsuits going like, whoa.
That's Avery, man. He took, I really want to jump in here. I would go ahead and do that. But I think, a takeaway for me as I got older is that if you know your why and you have a clear vision that's shareable and someone can align with, you have a lot of power. And the ability behind our vision of building a team and why we wanted to do it, because we wanted to bring base into the light, was very easy for a lot of people to see. But when you say, how do you choose a team member? Do you get along with them? Can you count on them? Are they not a knucklehead? Are they actually on board with what you're doing for the long term and not the short term, as we see a lot in base jumping of the really narcissistic ego, look at me, I can do it kind of thing. So, I think that's how it really played into longevity and where a team went in a natural course of development. But I do, keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's great. And let's talk about that. How did that team survive for so many years?
Well, okay. Back in the late 90s, after we had started doing the base jumping competitions, like my team, we were the first people to have the matching jumpsuits. Then I said, oh, we need matching rigs. So we all had matching rigs. Then we started getting logoed canopies, putting Team Ill Vision sewn on the top of our canopies. They were fucking expensive, but it was just something that had to be done. Then we moved into the skydiving world, into wingsuiting. And I built a whole different kind of a crew of skydivers at the drop zone. Not necessarily the base jumping. Some of them were base jumpers, and we did actually a lot of base jumping eventually. But what we did is we went down to the drop zone and learned how to fly these new wingsuity things. And there was several years when that's all we really focused on was wingsuiting, until we were all really good at it and bad enough to take the wingsuits off of the cliffs in Europe. And once again, being team-oriented, I thought the best way that we can look is to look sharp. So we all had to have matching wingsuits. So we got a sponsor and we got matching wingsuits.
And he set a standard that like no one could do.
What was the first sponsor?
Nobody could do that.
Me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Care to tell us about how?
I actually sponsored a lot of base jumping activities for many, many years because it was really hard to find real sponsors because we were just so sketchy. You know, when we first started talking about doing base events out in the desert, we thought, oh, for sure, MTV, Fox Sports, Extreme Channel, ESPN, they're all going to want to see this, and they all ran the other way. So we couldn't get anybody really to help us. Fortunately, I had a lucrative business going on, and I didn't mind pouring a lot of my assets into my passion.
A lucrative business. That sounds a bit cagey.
A little this, a little of that.
Yeah. We're talking like
consulting, I think.
Consulting work.
Yeah, it's got consulting work.
Like consulting banks out of their cash with masks on, or what are we talking about here?
Well,
much more legitimate.
Excuse me. It turns out, even though people will tell you it can't happen, money grows on trees. And I figured out a way to grow these little trees and turn it into a business selling little trees. And I made a lot of money. We all know how that turned out. But, you know, for me, what could I do?
Okay, so selling trees to finance the team. I love it. It's definitely wild. Let's get a bit about what it was like to live life on the other side of the law. What was the lifestyle?
Well, you know, I was raised by hippies, and hippies do like pretty much what they want to do, and the pot culture was something that I grew up in, and even though it's always been illegal, it's like it's always been very popular, and I was just one of those people who liked pot, and in the later years of my life, I started to just be somebody who grew really good pot. And so it was a way for me to offset expenses of life without having to dig ditches. And it snowballed just by my own, just how enthusiastic I am about whatever I do. If I'm doing something, I'm doing it. And I just ended up doing it really well and doing it really big. And so I made a lot of money selling pot. And I spent it on my passion. And there was this new thing, this base jumping thing that I was doing that didn't have a lot of money in it. The only way you could make some money in base jumping was start with more money. That was the only way to do it.
Was there any paranoia around, you know, skirting the law as a lifestyle? Did you have to be looking over your shoulder, or were you dialed in enough that you had relaxed into the to the scene?
Well, pre-1997, I was what you would call, a street dealer, because that's just what it was. In 1997, I happened to be partner in a truck that I drove with a guy who helped write Proposition 215 in California. And Fred told me at the time, he's all, you know what? You don't have to do the business the way you're doing anymore. There's legal avenues. And so I immediately got in 1997, into the medical marijuana businesses that were going on in the Bay Area in California.
And did this money fund not only the team, but also the travel that led to some of these events?
Oh,
Are you kidding me? We would have to split the cash up when we were traveling, so we all had under $10,000 on us. That was bizarre.
Yeah. There were times when I took a group of people, literally, and it's like I had to give each one of them, because I couldn't take $50,000 to Switzerland with me. I had to take 9 of my friends and give each of them $5,000.
So that you're under the legal limit for transportation of
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So talk me through how that led to some of the international events.
Well, you know, we were doing Bridge Day. We started Bridge Day organizing in 97, I think, was our first actual year that we did it ourselves. And that's when also we started our other events around the country. We were doing the Tombstone Challenge here in Moab. We were doing the Snake River Base Games off the Twin Falls Bridge. For a couple of years, we duped the fucking people up in Auburn to let us do 2 legal events off the Auburn Bridge through some filming loopholes. And then in that period, we also got involved in the late 1990s with Robin Hyde. He was a reporter for Skydiving Magazine, and he covered a lot of the shit that we did. He ended up somehow getting a connection in Malaysia, and we got involved with the first Petronas building jumps. But it was ironic because at the same time, another friend from Malaysia had got a hold of us and said, hey, we're really interested in Bridge Day and maybe trying to do something in Malaysia. And they sent out this lady, Alicia Bowie, who represented the KL Tower. And she did a Bridge Day with us one year. And she said, oh, yeah, you guys got to come to Malaysia. Well, we were already there. So it was just like so happenstance that we're like right next door to the Petronas was this KL Tower. And they said, hey, you guys want to do something here? And we said, absolutely. And so the Malaysians didn't want to pay us anything to do it. So all of a sudden, financing was needed for that. I financed initially all the shit we did in Malaysia. We just like, let's do it, you guys. We ended up doing the KL Tower for like 5 years. That was our next series of events.
What years were those?
We did our first event off the KL Tower in 2000. And then
Petronas was 2000, KL was 2001.
Oh, okay, you're right. Yeah, Petronas was 2000, right, and then it was over the millennium, and then
say that like it was the jump. The jump was at midnight from
Before
99
midnight.
to 2000.
Yeah, we did. Dennis and I, Dennis was like the real organizer of the thing for Robin, but he once again he gathered together his little crew, and on the first Petronas Bigway there were 3 members of Team Ill Vision on the load. We were on it, we were in it. Then we did the KL Tower 2001 through 2005. We had given up. Bridge Day got canceled in 2001 after 9/11, and it just it ruined so much for us to just lose that event that year that we just lost our enthusiasm. And we at that point handed off Bridge Day to Troy Widgery of Go Fast because he had also a lot of money and a lot of funds to be able to make the thing happen. Then we did the KL Tower for 5 years, and in the end of 5 years of doing the KL Tower, it was the same thing every year, and it never produced money coming back to us. It was always us. It was the clowns paying to have a circus, and we just got tired of it. We said, it's time for somebody to pay us to do it. Even though we could afford it, it just didn't make any sense. It was non-sustainable. So we handed off the KL Tower to Gary Cunningham. But also in those years, we picked up things like people in China got interested in us, and we did the first event from the Jinmao Tower.
Well, hold on, back up. KL Tower, started in 2001. Then we picked up the Alistar, which was 300 feet.
Yeah.
Alistar, Malaysia was because we were trying to build a circuit. Then we got Borneo in 2002. And then Jinmao
was 2003.
And I just want to have this one thing on Jinmao. That was, one of the gnarliest buildings covered in razor blades we ever jumped. And it was aired live to 2.5 billion people with a 250 million estimated viewership, with almost 500,000 people showing up on site.
Yeah.
Then Macau Tower with AJ Hackett in 2003.
Yep. We did those in those years. What else did we do?
Then came Little Colorado, Arizona,
we did an event out in
2008. And then after this whole debacle with the KL Tower and it started to crumble and they couldn't find the people to do it, then Avery organized Team Ill Vision again and took organized KL Tower again in Malaysia in 2018. And then came La Palapa and Acapulco. So that bagged for a while there. Avery literally had BASE events right? So now we had that worldwide. So La Palapa provided a legal building in 2018, which carried on for what, 3-4 years?
Yeah, we did it prior to the plague, and then we didn't go to Mexico during the plague years, and then we picked it back up and went for a few more years in Acapulco. I was supposed to be going to Acapulco with the whole gang of monkeys next month, but that place just got smashed by a hurricane. A lot of people don't realize
Acapulco got hit by a Category 4-5 hurricane, and it is 100% destroyed. Then Melanic antenna.
Yeah,
so now he's got a legal.
Yeah, that's when I got we didn't get the antenna until 2019. So up until then, I had events off bridges and earth, and we had spans because we had like Idaho and West Virginia. And in 2019, I finally was able to get an antenna, a legal antenna. So there are a lot of guys organizing base jumps out there, and usually they have object specific. They're doing this and that. We're the only guys that do it from everything.
Well, let me back up a little bit and pick up some of these pieces.
Okay.
I got to KL in 2015, 14, 15, 16. And this was after you had passed it off to Gary Cunningham. And I want to know what happened in those interim years. I mean, what I'm hearing from y'all is like you were traveling the world, financing all of these events and your travel on the other side of the law. But then there was a time that the community had to do without your leadership. And
we pulled back, man.
Yeah. So,
and there was some extenawant circumstances.
Well, let's talk about these extenuating circumstances and what I really want to know.
Next subject.
I want to know, what happened to these events and what happened to the team during the years where you're not out and about leading it.
Well, in essence, the team got put on hold just like I did. So, when I went to federal prison, there was the keystone had been lost. Unfortunately, the captain of the ship was otherwise occupied. So it kind of dissipated and dismantled, and people didn't do much. Time stood still for me, so I don't know what everybody was doing. Their lives went on, but I think my catalyst in the involvement of what I do is what makes, things solidify for us and gel.
Let me ask you this. How many years did you do?
Only 5.
What was it like coming out to a culture that had legalized the thing that you were in prison for?
Oh, it was really ridiculous. I was literally the last guy to get thrown in jail for selling pot. I was literally like the last one. Even when I was incarcerated, like most of the people in law enforcement that I encountered, they're all, "You're in for what? Why are you in for that? Isn't that legal?"
Yeah, but it's more like 10 years because you have the 3 or 4 years on the front end of going to court. Then you have the 5 served, and then you have the 3 to 4 when you come out. Like, what am I going to do now? So it's a long
put it this way: from when I picked up my court case until I was all ready to be free again, I didn't get to make a base jump for 7 years. That's how I judge it. It's like, yeah, as soon as when I picked up my legal troubles, I didn't have time to base jump. But when I got out of prison, man, the first thing I wanted to do was my probation officer to give me permission to go somewhere and do something. And I went right back to base jumping. It's all I thought about the whole time. I was not base jumping, was when am I going to get my life back? And for me, that was going base jumping.
There are a lot of people in our culture, in our communities, that burn the candle at both ends and live more life in several years than most people in an entire lifetime. Now, looking back on your career, you got to do a lot more because you were living on the other side of the law than most anyone would. And my question is, was it worth it?
Ooh. Well, I really lost a lot by the experience that I went through with my relationships with people. When a guy goes to prison, his whole family goes to prison. So it affected my daughter. It affected my wife. in some ways, actually, the federal government might have saved my life because, when I was in prison, a lot of my peers, a lot of my close friends, a lot of the guys that were doing exactly what I was doing at the time, because in 2008 and 2009, wingsuit base jumping and proximity flying were really just getting going with the older technology gear. And man, people were just dying left and right when I was in prison. So maybe by being in prison, they saved my life, because I would have been flying right, I would have been right on Jonathan Flores's tail. He's like one of my tightest buddies, and I would have been doing all that shit, and all these other guys that you look at that were doing the most dangerous things, I would have been doing it.
Well, let's transition then to this. You've got right here in this room, just on the three of you, a collective 100 years plus of base jumping experience.
Yes, we do.
How did you guys survive? What was the secret to the longevity?
A lot of it is luck, and it's not like all three of us haven't been busted up base jumping. I mean, we've been busted and broken and bruised and pretty near almost got killed several times in our progression of our sport. It takes, a certain knack. I was very fortunate in all of my stuff to do with parachute, skydiving, base jumping, just a natural knack for how these things operate and what to do and how to act quickly, because when you're base jumping and shit goes down, you don't have a whole lot of time to sit there and start thinking about what would I do. You need to just be doing it. So luck, skill, determination. I have my own limits that I set, and some of them are kind of low on other people's standards, but a ring, a rag, some string, and some savvy, right?
Dennis, you have to say something to this, because it's a real question. Like, it's
what's the secret to longevity?
Yeah, like how, why did we, a lot of people, we've lost a lot of people in the sport, and we have survived many, many years. Why do you think that? How did we survive all the stuff that we did?
There's a small portion of luck involved for sure. No matter how good you are, how good you pack, how much you know, how much aptitude you have for it, there's still some luck involved. You get dealt a bad hand and you can't deal with it. So every incident that happened, learn from it. I always dissected what happened to somebody here and there the best I could for myself. Excuse me. And glory and demise is but a fraction of an instance, right? And it really is. I mean, so many close calls you can have, and you got to at least know it was a close call and understand it. Like the closest I ever came to death, I was telling guys yesterday the story, it was here at Moab during our first Tombstone Challenge. I hadn't jumped in a while. I had a rig that was packed up for a while, and I put it on my back, and we were up top of the Tombstone, and I had started running. I was just going to run off the edge, like I did a lot of times. And I think it was Harry came walking up over the top, so I stopped. I said, I'll just wait. I'll go hang out, see what's up. We'll do something together. He came up, I pulled my pilot chute out, and I had a rubber band around it. So that was the closest I ever came to death, I think. And boy, did I learn from that. Because Movaletto taught me that little trick. So I said, no more ever again. I won't do that. Because if you can forget, nobody's immune to making a mistake. Nobody's immune to a glitch. Anything happens. So I try to put the odds in my favor the best I can. I always did. Like I said, I wasn't as crazy as people perceive me to be. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to get hurt. And I tried to understand everything I was doing. You know how it is when you start base jumping from skydiving, you start understanding your gear. People really start, oh.
So
I'd like to talk to that point too.
Yeah, and what I'm picking up is that the secret to your longevity was not making the same mistake twice.
Yeah, exactly. That's one.
Yeah, well, again, I think back of how we formed as a group and some of the things that we went through, like Cliff Camp, and how we started out as, innovators or people that we studied it and we did it together. And so we were constantly building skill sets and then taking those skill sets and then doing something else with them. So we're constantly building on not just like jump numbers, but what we're doing with it. So like I said before, we get a canopy, We'd go skydive with it. We'd set our brake settings. We'd come back to Auburn. We'd practice. We'd practice our skill sets for emergencies, right? Because we were afraid to be in them. We want to know how to work them. Also, within the group setting, when you're holding each other accountable, there's a little bit of humility there to the ability to be free to ask a question. Because you see a lot of time in a narcissistic space, like nobody wants to look bad. So they're more afraid to ask the question. And, in our environment, it was all like, hey, man, I forgot how to do this. Or what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Is that new? And developing systems of the ability to do the same thing over and over and over again, good at it, making your changes very small and really paying attention to the patterns and knowing when to walk down. That comes in a lot of your podcasts. Like, we didn't have a problem walking down. Like, our goals were bigger than we were, and we were doing it together. And I think that was a catalyst that really did affect our longevity, period.
So a couple of points that I want to pull out of that. The last one, if you want to make a long-range career, you got to have long-range goals. If your only goal is to do that next jump, then, there's nothing really motivating you to jump in a sustainable way.
Dude, having a vision, having a mission that's shareable and alignable with others is incredibly powerful. And I think that's what carried us through the good times and the bad times.
The other thing that I really love about what you just said is creating a space that's non-judgmental, where you can ask your homies something that would be possibly embarrassing to not know at the time that you're jumping, and certainly there's a lot of that stuff for me. Like, I'm 7-8 years off the job in a lot of the disciplines, and now I have a reputation of somebody that does know something in the sport, and it's hard to go back to the beginning and go like, look, I don't know this anymore. Who's got the expertise in this area? And it takes a very non-judgmental space for somebody to come back at it and admit what they don't know in order to, live a sustainable career.
At the same time, it takes people that can accept that from people and not be judgmental.
Yeah.
And Dennis really set the standard for that. And I think Avery literally picked it up in his team environment. That's how we lived. And
in that regard, that space has to be there, like Harry said, to be able to ask the questions and also to be able to accept the criticisms, because there are people on the base fatality list who maybe were mentioned by somebody, what about this and what about that? And their attitude was, fuck you, I know what I'm doing. Dead.
Good point.
Dead. And also, you know what, I'm going to do this. And it's like, that really doesn't sound like a very good idea. Have you thought that through? And no, fuck you, I know what I'm doing. Dead. Like several times. It's like, it comes up to where like their ego, and it's like, no, don't touch me. Don't look at me. Don't judge me. Don't help me. Dead.
Nobody's immune to a glitch, no matter how good you are. It comes right down to that.
Do y'all have any secrets to reaching your own crew when you start to see them making mistakes that they're not, quite aware of or admitting to, when they're resistant to somebody's feedback? Is there strategies for getting them to get back on the right path?
Absolutely, I do. I talk to, like, sometimes when I see my teammates, or even not mostly my team, because it's the crew that I look out for. But I will, if I see anybody at a base jump doing something, I will at least say something, check out their attitude if they want to hear something about it. And if they don't, well, I've done all I can do. But like, I do have talks with my own people, and people have had talks with me, just my little crew. It's like, hey, I noticed this, or you're doing that, or could you improve this to make us happier with the way you look during your base jump? Because when you go off looking sloppy or shitty or doing this or that, it makes us feel bad in a way. It's like, that guy's going to get hurt if he carries on that habit again and again.
So then you must take on a certain amount of accountability and responsibility for one another.
Well, yeah, it's self-correcting. You're creating an atmosphere and an environment where it kind of self-balances. I mean, think about it. We came out here in 97 to do an actual competition off a 350-foot cliff. We don't want anybody to die. And back then, it was rare to have over 100 base jumps. Some of those guys had 20, 30 base jumps. We can't have anybody get hurt on our watch. We're just trying something new. If somebody dies or gets hurt, we're done. So there was a hyper vigilance around safety, introduction of gear, and really bringing it forth. Like, we can die doing this. We have to do it right every time.
It sounds like the community and the culture has kind of gone the other direction in recent years, where it's hyper independent. And case in point, check this out. Look at Point Break 1. That crew is super tight. They're watching each other's backs. Okay. Point Break 2, the movie opens or nearly opens with somebody dying, right? And the crew just being like, that was his line, bro. And not even checking on him, just like whoosh, off.
Yeah, well, that's flipped. That's kind of flipped. I think that it's easy to judge the new community or the new thing that, and it's, it's kind of all the same and different at the same time. But like, I was telling these guys, I haven't found in my life another group of guys I can hang out with and actually create together. And it's hard, I think, to find people that want to work in groups, because base jumping can be very narcissistic and very, very independent. And I think it has its place, right? Like, to go get world records or to push boundaries. Like, sometimes you got to do that on your own, right? But the ability to find people to work together is really, really hard. And I'll bet you, like, Matt and Taz and Moab Base Association, they're facing all of it right now. Like, when do people sacrifice and come together as a group for something bigger than themselves? It's rare, man. It's just rare.
Avery, any thoughts on how to stay tight as a crew? How to maintain your individuality while also taking responsibility for the group and its direction?
Well, because we have a tight crew. We have a team. We call ourselves a team, and we all know that we are on a team. So we all look out for each other. We stay in touch all the time, all year, no matter if we're base jumping or not. We try and keep all of our people as up jumpers, current, jumping all the time, being base jumpers, so that when we go base jumping, they're like ready to go.
Well, let's move on for a bit, and I want to ask you about the time that you spent not jumping. In that time that you had that forced hiatus, did you have any realizations about your jumping or jumping in general that helped you get into it in a different way? Or was it a continuation of the same trajectory that you had before you took the break?
You make it up for lost time, man.
Yeah, well, it was unfortunate that I didn't get to jump for a few years, but I kept in touch with a lot of my base jumping friends, and so I was able to live vicariously through what they were doing. Harry Parker was in touch with me for my whole time with the emails. I was in touch the whole time with Jonathan Flores right up until the very last weeks before I got out of prison. I got my Parachutist magazine, so at least I could look at pretty pictures. There was a drop zone nearby, and I had friends like go to the drop zone and go make wingsuit jumps over my prison, so I could like go out in the baseball field and it's like, okay, you're jumping at 1 o'clock. They would come and visit me in the morning and then go to the drop zone. And then I had friends that would like go and make skydives for me so I could see my friends skydiving right above where I was. So it was on my mind every day, amongst other things, my family and other things that were going on in the world. But yeah, I never stopped being a base jumper even when I couldn't.
I see. So even though it was a break from the physical activity, it was still a continuation of your own trajectory. I mean, you were still in your mind base jumping and skydiving and doing all of these things.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't spend my time thinking, when I get out, I guess I got to get a job and go be a regular human. I was on, no, I just can't wait to get back and be myself.
Well, speaking of being yourself, I know that there are a couple of things that you've got that you've heard from previous podcasts that you want to bring up. So let's get into some of those personal things.
Yeah, well, there was just some things that I had heard in podcasts about the subject, and one of them was about people's jobs and what they did for a living and how base jumping interfered with their life in that regard. And it just struck me because, once I started base jumping, that's really what I was. And once I really, really got into it, that's how I identified myself. So usually when somebody comes up and introduces themselves to you and they say, hi, I'm so-and-so, blah, 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 who are you? What do you do? And people go, oh, I'm a plumber or I'm a bus driver. And for years, people say, so what do you do? And it's like, I'm a base jumper. Yeah, no, but what do you do for a living? I'm a base jumper. Well, how do you get money? Whatever. Money, grows on trees. So, it's just, but that's how I would describe myself. So it was interesting because, excuse me, for me, it was always when I had to have a job, how did the job interfere with my base jumping? Not the other way around. The base jumping took the precedent. So sometimes I just wouldn't do a job because I'm all, no, I got something better to do than go work,
Is that what it is to be a base jumper? To prioritize it above the other things that might define you?
Well, you asked earlier, what is a base jumper and a non-base jumper? A fucking base jumper is somebody who lives base. I live base. I wake up in the morning and I think about base jumping. I'm driving around. I'm never looking at the scenery. I'm looking up. What's up there to be jumped off? It's just a different perspective about what or who you are or what you think defines you.
Is there something to be said for that mentality adding to longevity? Like, it's hard to see somebody being on point that's not living the lifestyle. If you're only half a gangster, if you've only got like a foot in the door, I
don't think I'd be alive. Yeah. If I wasn't, and I hate to say it because I think currency is a double-edged sword. Like, man, if I was doing it just on the weekends or, seasonally, like it's really hard to continue base jumping in this age when time goes by. It's a whole different ball game without really having your brain in the game 100%.
Avery's he's a little more methodical than most. He's a different kind of base jumper than most, even the base jumpers. He studies. He wants to know. He's methodical. He's organized, and he doesn't want to die. For sure. And what he wants, base jump, hardcore still. So he's different than most base jumpers.
Avery?
I am different than most base jumpers. Yeah.
And what do you think about the idea that currency is a double-edged sword and that the more you do it, certainly the better you get at it, but the more opportunity you give yourself to get fucked up?
Absolutely. It is. Yeah, right. To stay current means you need to jump a lot. And the more you jump, the more you're exposed. And it's the eventual exposure to something dangerous after a long period of time, which your odds are that maybe at some point you're going to have a mishap because of your exposure. But I think currency is the best way for your body to always remember what it is supposed to be doing. Packing all the time, so you always remember how to pack, and so you just keep these things, it's like muscle memory, and this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is how your body works. Casual base jumpers, maybe their longevity is that they are not exposed to the dangers as often, and also casual base jumpers maybe don't go to different extreme types of objects. Maybe they just stick to something super comfortable,
Plus the gear. The gear works.
Yeah, but this is a hotly debated topic of whether casual and conservative base jumping is more sustainable than full immersion. And I've heard this argument from both sides, and certainly the BFL is littered with people who have proposed to do both. Like, there are people that are full immersion jumpers on there. There are a lot of people also that are casual and conservative that ended up on the list. And if you see the mistakes, it's hard to choose or to analyze which one of those has a greater chance of success.
Comes down to attitude, I believe. Attitude of the jumper that's jumping. Like, I was jumping, I was really current. Back then, what I was doing, I was out on the edge doing some of the extreme stuff. Now it's like, it doesn't even compare to what some of these guys are doing nowadays. But I got to where I was looking off of a 400-foot building and getting bored. So I backed off and went and did other things. Because I knew that you can't get complacent. If you got to keep pushing it to get more of a buzz, I think it's going to get dangerous.
So what is the way? What is the Teflon for complacency? Because that's something that plagues the community as well.
I think Steph Davis, she mentioned margins, and that really struck me. I think that wherever you're in the sport, if you have the awareness and, like Dennis said, the attitude, you're gonna pick and choose what you jump, with your longevity in mind. That's an attitude. Leaving margins of error or margins of safety for each individual might be a little bit different, right? So it is a complicated web for sure. I don't know if you'll fully figure it out, but I think if you go with attitude and how the individual looks at it, you can look at it 100 different ways. I mean, there's a lot of influence on
limitations
that
and being conservative, knowing what your limits are, what you want to stick within your limits. I know what my limits are pretty much for what I'm comfortable doing, and I'll do certain things. Like sometimes I say that's what I've done it, but that's not what I do. Certain types of jumps, do it and like close the chapter and walk away. Canopies are a lot different today, right, than they were years ago. So our opening altitudes, our consistency of openings are different. So our altitudes were a little bit different, what was conservative and what was not. And the guys that are getting into it now, some of them, they just don't know they don't know how to respect it enough in a way because they haven't been there. Like, you can't buy experience. Experience comes with doing it and seeing it and learning it and living it. And that's part of the longevity. The longer you live in it, the longer you realize that nobody's immune to that glitch. It's a little easier to be conservative.
Yeah.
I think.
I guess I'm also curious on, backing off, how that adds to longevity, because as you back off, you also get duller on your skill set. Personally, right, I was pushing really hard during the 2000 teens and operating at near 100%, but super confident because I was doing it every day and I was fully immersed. And now that I've backed off, in order to feel the same amount of confidence, I've got to be operating at like 25% of my proposed capacity, and so I'm curious, but
isn't it great?
It is. It's still great. It's still great.
But you give some of that fear and respect back into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So how much fear and respect is necessary for a career that's 30 plus years? Obviously, if you don't fear anything at all, man, over that period, you're not going to make it.
No, fear turns into respect for sure. I think, you got to have some fear. Yesterday was first base jump. I think I've made maybe 3 or 4 base jumps in the last year, because I've been doing my rafting thing. So I'm up there on Tombstone yesterday looking around, seeing all these people. It was mind-blowing to me, because I haven't been here in 25 years. To see the scene yesterday was the parking lot was full. There's people everywhere at all kind of exit points everywhere. I just sat up there and grinned and smiled and enjoyed it. And then it was my turn to jump. Everybody else had gone because I waited till everybody was gone. I wanted to watch. It was my turn. I'm thinking, here I am. I'm on current. I made 1 bridge jump, I guess maybe in the last year, maybe 2. I haven't been on a cliff in a long time, but it was all mine. I got to jump yesterday. It was great. It was awesome because I wasn't current. I had that good fear. It was fun. I had a lot of fun yesterday making the 1 jump.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes that fear does turn into excitement, right?
Oh yeah. And there's the commitment. I'm going to go now. I used to trick myself a lot. I'm going to go, and then I'd go and stop. Not, just out of random. And sometimes you get a good little buzz going. But yesterday, I enjoyed it. Yesterday, it was a lot of fun.
Avery, what else is on your list?
There was a subject that came up on a recent podcast about the base fatality list and how it has evolved and what it is now and what it means to the base community, and then also some of the new modern attitudes about base jumping, dying, and the list. Because when we were kids base jumping, man, when somebody came up on the list, it was like that
crushing.
It was always crushing, and it was never anything that you wanted to, it was like you didn't even want to know about it, but you had to know about it. And we always knew about all the different ones. And now that the list is hundreds of people into it, and there's all those stories, and there was kind of this attitude about the romanticism for base jumpers of the list. And it was right after I had listened to that podcast that a guy went in Europe, And his attitude before and always had been about how he would get on the list. And it was like a fully romanticized thing. It was almost like heroic status will now be achieved because I'm going to be one of those guys. And the conversation about afterwards on the circumstances of how he went in also fully made him this heroic person for dying and getting on the list exactly the way he said he would. And comments like, I want to be like that when I grow up. It was just like, to me, mind-blowing, because I don't want to fucking get on the list.
So do you think us canonizing our dead leads to more people taking obscene risks?
Well, no, like I say, but it gives them the opportunity to achieve that status. Yes, right?
I mean, we don't have a list of legends. We don't. We don't have a list of any other kind.
That's why I'm so stoked to be here and so stoked of your work. Because again, if you look at life through the lens of evolution itself, what you're witnessing is just a component of that evolution. And will the culture make a correction or not? So I won't make somebody wrong for being on that list. But if you step back and look at it, as crazy as it is, like, well, then what are we not doing or being with or accepting or being together? What do you do differently? And I think what you're doing here changes that trajectory, because now we can get into memorials, we can get into ministering our dead, we can get into actually processing trauma as a culture that is different from anything else in the world. And that's an evolutionary component. So yeah, you can take a look at that and go, wow, that's a red flag. Okay, well, if it is, then what should we be doing that's different, and how do we get there? And that's a much bigger vision in community and culture and evolution than looking at one individual example.
Totally. I hope that I'm giving people an opportunity to gain notoriety through amazing works in the sport, rather than, like, most of the time you get notoriety either from dying or doing something so sketchy that everybody's talking about it.
Right. Well, and also, as a collective consciousness, is our expectation of what the next base fatality is going to be, does that somehow grow the list, right? Because there are people, like, they wake up in the morning, they check their social media and everything, and it's like, oh, I wonder if anybody's on the list again. Or, the expectation that something is going to grow could have something to do actually with it growing. Now, Nick DiGiovanni, many, many years ago, he just got tired of doing the list. And it was one of those reasons that he had said at the time was because he was sitting there expecting it to come, it would come. And so by putting it away, he no longer had to think about what's the next thing to come. And I don't know if it has anything to do with it, but there's a lot of times when a lot of people die in base jumping, and then then the BFL becomes the new hype, and then everybody's checking it to see what's next. And maybe if we all just think about something else, next is going to show up, but maybe not so often.
So what do you guys think about sensationalizing the morbid nature of the practice?
Then don't do it. Like, what you're doing here is documenting people while they're still alive, right? If you give people a goal, they'll go for it. So if when you look at ethics and you look at people that you admire, why do you admire them? Why do you admire the pros in the sport of skydiving, right? Why do you admire them? Because what they're doing and who they're being in the world. We are human beings. Who you're being matters. So if you instead of taking your attention and putting on who's dying, why don't we take it on, put your attention on who's doing what in the sport for the betterment of the sport and themselves and the world around them, and make that the focus. Then you're celebrating people in real time while we're alive, and that's a different mindset. But that's a cultural choice, and that's a huge shift, because evolution is messy and it takes a lot of time and a lot of work, and anything you do in that arena is you're working well past yourself. And not a lot of people are going to do that. So I think like this is a start.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. What are some of the things in the modern bass jumping culture that y'all are stoked on? What are some of the things that you'd love to highlight that you've seen pop up in the last few years?
Talk for hours about that.
Well, just give me some highlights. You know,
the gear goes without question. The gear, watching the evolution of gear, where it's come from, where it's at now. I mean, when I started parachuting, I was skydiving. I was jumping round parachutes. That's what we had. I mean, to see where it's come through skydiving and then base jumping, it's that's impressive. And the ability to jump with friends in the open in the daylight, that's great. That's what I always dreamed of. It should have been that way. You're jumping clandestine at night, and it's cool and groovy and all, but it gets old. It's a lot more fun to jump with your friends during the day. Like I saw yesterday, that was awesome. Some of the things that the cons about it is these guys are doing what I perceive to see is crazy stuff. You know, the crazy exits and doing some of this crazy stuff. Like my folks, they didn't like rock and roll. You know, it's kind of the same thing. I guess we're just from a different culture. But it's but they're
Avery, yeah, what's gotten you stoked in the last couple of years?
Well, I mean, over the whole time, really, what really changed and really was advancing base jumping was the whole gear thing, is like just making better gear. I completely agree with Dennis about the whole, we're not sneaking around in the bushes at night doing dangerous shit. Now at least, and in a hurry, you know, because we're here, we got to get the fuck out of here as quick as possible. Now we can take our time and mosey along to so many exit points now and hang out and enjoy the everything and the all that it is, and just make these peaceful base jumps. Dennis taught me how to base jump. It was rudimentary at the time just because that's how it was done. Now there's a lot of actual real live base jumping courses by people who really know what they're doing, and they stick to it and they're hardcore about it. And so instruction has come a long way. With that has come the influx of base jumpers or people who now base jump that only go to their course and then they're set out into the world, and they don't have, you know, one thing that we had to learn when we started base jumping was rigging. You had to be a rigger to be a base jumper. And there are a lot of base jumpers nowadays who are not at all riggers, and they don't completely understand their gear. So this whole popularity rise has come through all the different manufacturers making all this wonderful gear that really works, and all these guys teaching base courses. And so at least people are having, like, you know, more instruction on how to base jump, other than here's how you fold it, this is what you do, hang on to this, jump, count to 3, throw that thing, you'll be all right, you know. So it's a lot different in that regard.
Though I'm not sure that that's actually led to more people jumping sustainably. And here's the opposite opinion. While they do receive excellent instruction in the beginning, right? Like, there are a great number of people who have dedicated their lives to just creating base jumping curriculum and be there to teach those new people. After that, there are so many people now flooding into the community that there aren't enough mentors to bring them the rest of the way. And now you see, like, people not part of crews, not part of anybody that's part of the history, just trying to figure it out on their own without even a friend like you had.
Oh, I know.
You're 100% right.
Yeah.
Movoletto had a term he used to say, arming the soldiers of destruction.
Yeah, I remember that. Movoletto. Oh my God, so much to talk about.
Giving these people gear and...
In answer to that question, dude, like, to give you context, like back in 1994, when Dennis had this brilliant idea to start the CJAA, you know, we had to force the current manufacturers, Tachi Botham, TNT Rigging, Ann Helliwell, Martin Tilley,
Adam Filipino.
We had to force them to, like, agree on some standards of protocol.
Mo was in that group.
Everything's secret, right? We produced, like, it was under 20 pages of a base jumping protocols. No one had ever done it before. And that stood the test of time till 2010, around 2010, when Matt Gertz came out with the book of base, right? That's 3 editions. He's putting out the third edition now of that book. And so when I look at that, and I look the ability of the digital space to share, how base isn't so secretive. You're actually sharing information. That's a longevity component.
No question. No question that there is more available information now, and coursework is more readily accessible than it's ever been. I guess my question is, how do we deal with the massive influx of people?
Well, my question is, how did you not, like, didn't you guys learn something from Jimmy Pouchard?
Well, I'm going to say the same thing. I got lucky. I came up base jumping at Paris when Apex was right across the street. Before I even walked into AFF level 1, I was in their office.
Leaders and innovators, man.
Right. And so I got to get to know them through my entire AFF progression. I was never in need of a mentor. I was never in need of somebody that was highly experienced, that had been like in the sport for 30 plus years. So, I can't say that my progression is what everybody else got. They didn't have the opportunity. I mean, look at everybody that had to learn this in another state, in another drop zone, without, Todd and Jimmy and Marta, like literally right there in front of you every day that you were trying to get this done.
A luxury.
Yeah, but like he created. I look at Jimmy Pouchard and the gang, all of those guys, and you guys. They created this deep, deep sense of community here, and it provided a homecoming every year for Thanksgiving, and created that community. And my question is, well, that the answer to your question is there, but it's so independent that who's going to lead those charges, and where's the why big enough, or the vision big enough for people to go in a certain direction? I see some of it, like I see like an emergence of collective consciousness in Moab, right? You got the big turkey boogie bash, right? You've got certain things that are still happening in pockets. But, being a base jumper is about being a survivalist. And so what I think separates some base jumpers from others is the ability to kind of unionize and group yourself and get this flashbang of a few years of just these golden opportunities to spend together and make all those journeys together and jump together. And that's your mentorship clans. How you cultivate that, like now and in the future, I'm not sure, but I am sure it's possible.
I mean, maybe we just need to go back to creating more teams.
Could be. Well, I do notice that the younger generations of jumpers actually, when I go to places like Twin Falls and there's lots of people there, I see most people are with other people. And I see also a lot of the younger people are like, maybe they're newer jumpers and they're much more willing to be friends and talk and create camaraderies and create units and create their gangs and find out, we're from the same area. We should start doing stuff together. So, as for the individuals that are just like, the loners that are doing it on their own, they're going to maybe have a harder time getting more information about the things that they're doing, or their gear, or locations, where to jump, objects, what's safe, evaluating objects that they haven't been to by themselves and they don't have a buddy to go and talk it over with, or, but I see more of them doing a lot of stick togetherness stuff.
I guess here's the issue. Rather than like looking at the community as like groups and loners, I don't think that there are a lot of loners. I mean, there are certainly a lot of individuals that go out and they really want to like progress as a soloist. But even in the groups, there is still a huge gap in the information exchange, from the generation of jumpers that innovated to the generation of jumpers that's now. I got that direct experience. I was involved in communication directly across the street from some of the innovators. Now, it takes a couple of transfers to get there, right? Like you three are not in, you just mentioned that you were out at Tombstone with like hundreds of these jumpers, right? Or like, dozens of these jumpers.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah. How many of them knew that you would have some of the information that they actually need? Very
Zero.
few of them, right?
None of them.
Right. That campfire doesn't exist anymore because the community has scaled so drastically.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you then, Matt. I'm going to challenge you. Like, when we travel overseas, Avery and I went did my 55th. He took me to Switzerland for my 55th birthday. And we were in Lauterbrunnen, and we just happened to go into the coffee shop, and we got to hang out with the Swiss-based association. Remember that?
Yep.
And these were the leaders. And all we had was accolades. Just go, thank you, man, for doing all of this work and herding all this cats, and this selfless amount of work that you put into this. And I look at the States and it's kind of embarrassing. We don't really have anything. Now with that, I'll take a step back and go, you know what? Thank you, Matt Lodge. Thank you, Taz. I look at the Moab Base Association and like, dude, why are we represented? And why is it so resisted? And if you were to put that as a center point for information, and I can walk to that table with 100 ideas based on experience, that what worked and what didn't. So we're waiting on it.
Yeah, and that is something that I definitely question. Like, why is there such a resistance to associate?
It's insanity, dude. It's insanity. And it's always been like that. It's like I said, it's same shit, different day.
Because from my perspective, all three of you have had amazing careers based due in a large part to your associations as a team, your associations as event coordinators and organizers, as industry leaders and innovators. Like, you had no problem with it. You wanted to associate.
We were
with
bushwhacking there in the beginning, though. There weren't any standards really. It was we have to kind of make some stuff up as we went.
Okay.
Yeah, I would suggest that, but dude, you got thank you very much. And at the same time, sitting here and having this opportunity, we did not do it all alone, right? Like, when you look at Todd Truth, Anthony Helliwell, Marty Tilley, Adam Filipino, and you look at some of these people who started in the early days, we were all kind of doing it together in our own way, bumping it up against each other and putting up with each other and knowing that we had to do something and trying to figure out a way. But it wasn't just us. Every person that showed up and helped out, every person who saw the vision and made the sacrifice, every person that got along when we needed him to get along, every person that made it pull through, we're standing on the shoulders of giants before us. Nick G, Mo Valetto, all these people that were, that prompted us to carry the torch and move in our own way. And it wasn't just us, right? You had all these other people doing their own things. I'll never forget Annie Helliwell telling me, I say, hey, look at my new business card. She's like, well, I have a business. And I'll just roll. He's like, yeah, you're kind of right, And we all played our own parts in this out of sheer survival and the tenacity that this is what we wanted to do, and saw the opportunity to make change, to lead, even when we were young and didn't know what we were doing.
We wanted to expose the sport too, though.
We were going to go.
A lot of guys didn't. They wanted to keep it clandestine, keep it underground, because they knew they felt it was going to ruin the sport. As soon as it got exposed, then it was going to be over. There was a battle between that with a lot of the guys.
Oh my God, it's in paragliding right now. It's sick. It's stupid.
Yeah, when we first did events here in Moab, there was a certain contingent of the base jumping community who really weren't stoked that we were doing it. Now, there was the predominant group was all stoked for it, because there were people that were itching to do the same thing that we want to do, which was, once again, get out of the bushes in the dark of night, sneaking around on shit. They wanted to come out and just be able to enjoy nice, casual daylight base jumping. But there was a whole bunch of guys you guys are going to fuck this up for all of us. It's shut up. Let us jump in the dark in Moab and here and there. Nobody will even know we're there. And all you're doing is creating a focus, and something's going to happen. And then, of course, there's going to be a twist by the news of these maniacs and how they're doing this dangerous stuff. And, so there's always going to be the different sides of the thing. Yeah.
And you're never going to be able to really withhold information and growth like that. And you're never going to be able to do it if you try to put a cap on it. And you're never going to be able to put a cap on people's passions. When you look at what the young people are doing now as leading on the edge and literally leaning into the edge of the future and creating the future with new possibilities and stuff that we couldn't even have dreamed of doing. You're never going to stop that from happening. It's just not.
Well, let me start to wrap this up with a question that we've asked a lot of guests, and that is, if you look back over your career, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Well, actually, I would have done more stuff that I didn't do.
Yeah, do tell.
Well, I mean, just opportunities that I had basically in base jumping when I was maybe overly cautious, or, just places I could have gone and should have done. Is like, I don't know, should I have made different career choices? I don't know. I'm pretty happy. I had some bad years, but whatever. And I've been hurt base jumping, and I've been to the hospital. And so, there's that. I've raised a child. It didn't come with a book. That was a challenging task of raising a child. I've been in relationships, long-term relationships with women. And so what in my life would I have done differently? Not a lot. There's only things that it's better to regret something you have done than to regret something that you haven't. And so there are things that I didn't do that I wish I'd have done, just because they seemed so dangerous, but I might have, been more fulfilled had I done them. What can you change about your life? I don't know. You can't.
I withheld. Should have gone bigger.
See, same thing.
We should have gone bigger. We should have pushed and, kept pushing. But, after a while, I think we had a good 10-year run, you get tired, and, a lot of just the stuff that you deal every day in base jumping and relationships gets tiring and disappointing sometimes. But, if I look back, it would have been go bigger, push harder. You only got one life, and it goes by quick. So when I think back, I would have just kept pushing harder than I did.
I would not have changed much. I had a great ride. It was a lot of fun. Got to do pretty much everything I wanted to do. Like I said, when it finally hit me that I was jumping off of low buildings, and I wasn't getting the buzz out of it anymore. It was time to go do something else. And but I had a lot of fun, a lot of ride. Turned a lot of people onto the sport. Turned a lot of people on the ability and a way to have fun doing something like that. I love, and when I'm passionate about something, I enjoy turning other people onto it. Regrets, I don't have a whole lot of regrets. I mean, you can't second guess fate, right? You can't be somewhere. You might have been somewhere else at the wrong time, been taken out by a drunk driver. You can never tell. So I try not to look at regrets. I try to look at like I had an awesome ride. It was a lot of fun. I ain't done yet, but a lot of memories. This little interview has stoked up a lot of memories. Jesus.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah,
to be on here, and thank you for all you do, and a big shout out to all the people who supported us and hated us and put up with us. Like it's huge. I mean, there's so many people to mention. I do before you close, I do want to mention Tom Sanders, because Tom Sanders and Aerial Focus, along with David Major, documented everything we did for like 10 years.
Tom supported everything.
And if it wasn't for those guys, like, we wouldn't have gotten the film permits. We wouldn't have been able to do a lot of what we did. We were known for over a decade as the three-headed dragon, because we each had our own individual personality. And we had a really great run, but we have a lot of people to think about it. And I wish I had prepared a real list. Mo Valetto joked a lot about building antenna based on the tombstones of those who passed. And, there's just a lot of people to thank, and I think that getting the community to understand more of the history is going to help further some of your goals.
Absolutely. And while we're understanding the history, I've got another closing question for you. Base jumping gives a lot. It certainly takes away a lot as well. And if you look back over your careers in base, what was the biggest sacrifice that you had to make? And what was the biggest gift that the practice gave you?
That's deep.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a little funny story about that I have about the whole base thing. So when Alexandria, my daughter, was really young, her mom left me, and so I was a single dad. And then I just started skydiving again, and I had just started base jumping in '93, and I had this girlfriend. I lived with her for like 3 years, I think, in Santa Rosa. And then it was at one point that this girl who now had a really strong relationship with my daughter, she finally said, look, it's me or the parachutes. And so I started packing my shit to move out of the house, right? So because that was a sacrifice I was not willing to make. It's funny because Alexandria still has a relationship with this lady in Santa Rosa. And she, they're still friends. They have their own relationship. But this lady married this regular guy, and he does a regular job. And so Alex goes to visit him. And I just had a talk with Alex the other day, because now Alex has now become a base jumper, and it's one of her new passions. And I said, so Alex, you remember that time that she said, it's me or the parachutes? And Alex is all, yeah, I remember that. And I said, and I chose the parachutes. And I'm all, yeah. And so you still go visit her, and you've met her new husband, Greg, or whatever the hell his name is. I don't know. And he's just like this regular nice guy and doing this regular nice life, right? And I was all, yeah. I said, aren't you glad that I chose the parachutes and I'm not that guy? And she laughed. So, oh yeah, Dad, you made the right choice, man. You didn't need that girlfriend. You needed those parachutes. So that was one sacrifice that I made, but totally selfishly, because parachutes were way more important to me than a stable relationship.
Okay. So had to sacrifice some relationships of people that were putting you at odds with who you really were.
Absolutely.
Now, what about on the other side, gifts?
Gifts?
Yeah. What was one of the biggest gifts that the sport's given you, or the practice?
Just because it has helped me become who I am.
In what way?
I am base jumper. I am parachutist. I am risk taker. I am adventure. I am danger. I am party. I am team. I am camaraderie. I'm travel. I am new places. I am new exit points. So it is just like, I can't imagine myself being anything other than a base jumper.
And so it allowed you to manifest destiny, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. It's like just, and like I say, fortunately for me, in all the parachuting things that I've ever done in my life, it's come to me naturally. It's never been a chore for me. I didn't have to learn how to skydive. The first time they threw him out of an airplane, I'm all, oh, I'm skydiving. This is how you do it. As soon as I made my first base jump, I'm all, oh, I know how to do that. I can do that. We're doing it.
Gentlemen, sacrifices and gifts.
Sacrifices and gifts. My ridiculous passion for the sport ended up costing me several years of fighting the federal government. It consumed me for years and years, changed me too by the time it was over. It was disappointing because we were right. The argument was right. We were right. And to find out that the government was not going to let it happen, just said no all the way to the appellate courts. And then they just said no, even though they agreed with us. And they put me in jail. That was a pretty big sacrifice. Several years in there, 6-7 years in there. And I don't know, one of the greatest gifts is I got to do it, and I still get to do it. I love it. And I met a lot of cool people and hang out with cool people. I've traveled all over the world doing it. It's I would have never been at Angel Falls. I never would have been to some of these places getting to experience some of that stuff. Running off the edge of a cliff with a parachute, that's a pretty big gift. To be able to do it over and over again. And as you know, when you're there in the moment, it's yours. It doesn't belong to anybody else, and you can't take that away from you. But yeah, the biggest gift to me was I still get to do it. And the bottom line is, all those people yesterday, they're jumping legally in the daylight, taking it for granted in a lot of ways, because we didn't have any legal base jumping. There was nothing. There was nothing except bridge day. Maybe the occasional demo here and there or whatever, but there was no, you just run out the cliff with hundreds of friends and jump all day long and rage and everything. It was none of that stuff going on. That's cool to see that. That fruition of a dream is just a big reward too. It's cool to sit back and look and ponder.
I'm so glad you made it out here, Dennis.
Yeah, it's cool.
So glad. Like my biggest loss, probably my body. I beat myself up pretty bad. Over time, didn't sink maybe as much time as I should have into a business, I'd say almost minor stuff, but the gifts, like, it wouldn't change any of it. What I got to experience with these guys and a lot of the base jumpers that are around, in the environment that we share in life and death, all the travel. Like I said, I never would have gone to Angel Falls. I never would have gone to Sweden. I never would have gone and seen these places and lived a life on the road less traveled. It was I think, very enriching for me. With my backstory and history as a kid, like to be able to achieve some of that stuff in acceptance, in community. We had a lot of wins. I mean, they may not have changed the world, maybe we didn't solve starvation, but I had the opportunity to live into something that was bigger than me. And like Dennis says, you come back out here and you just see it. It's like, wow. So like, I give you an example, like, and thank you to all the people out there listening, all the young people that actually still let us hang around and like, remember who we are and still accept us as the old guys. Man, it just like means the world. So I think being able to cultivate that over time, like that's the gifts outweigh the sacrifices in any kind of a manner. It drove me into spirituality because of, the way we have to face death. So I got a lot out of it, a lot of gifts. And like right now, this is our 26th year since 1997 only, since we started coming here. So that's a big reunion, which was a catapult. You guys, Jimmy and Martin, and you guys came out here and made the Turkey Boogie. We get to come back and enjoy that and relish in it and still be accepted into it at this age. That's a gift. We're at the Watermelon House where we started in community, consciously building, a yearly homecoming for us as we get older. So, man, like, there's a lot of gifts that came out of it, a lot of things and experiences we got to do that would not have happened without the sacrifices we put in.
Well, Avery, I want to end on you. And I want to ask you, now that we've got a large part of the community listening to this, is there anything that you'd like to express to everybody? You got the mic. Is there something that you feel is important for the people around you and the people around them to know?
Well, these new generations of base jumpers, and they're all, it's funny because I jump with kids. It's so funny for me to go out base jumping and I get hooked up with a little group of kids. We're out there jumping, find out they're all like 20 something. I go, oh, fuck, I've been jumping longer than you have even been a conception. And so the only thing is that, just, try and maintain some of the old ways that we started with. Take only pictures, leave only footprints. Don't desecrate some of these objects that we have to jump that are so beautiful. Pick up your trash. Be conscious of who's to come after you when you're at some of the accepted objects, and don't try and do stuff that's just so ridiculous that it could cause us any more scrutiny than we already have. Love each other, look out for each other, jump good gear, and, keep everything kind of safe-ish.
Well, Avery, first of all, thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for bringing Dennis and Harry with you. It's been a pleasure to talk to all three of you about the history of base jumping and where it's come from, where you guys started, and where you see it going from here. So, again, huge thanks, and I'm looking forward to the next generation.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
It's amazing that we have lived this long. Like you say, there's 100 years of base jumping right here, and it's like for me and Dennis and Harry to still be in the game, doing it together as much as we can, and to just have an association, and also that there's the desire for you and anybody else who's interested in some perspectives from some old dinosaurs who are still in it,
All you kids out there, keep crushing it!
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any thoughts about what you've just heard, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Big shout out to Mark Stockwell, our sound engineer and co-producer. We love you, and we couldn't do this without you. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, visit our website, exitpointpodcast.com. And if you're jumping out there, remember that fame is simply being recognizable, infamy is to be storied, and legendary is something else entirely.